back with another Stasios conversation. And today we are going to talk about a very interesting development in the Huberman lab world. I don't know, Ian, are you typically a Huberman fan? I like Andrew Huberman and tune in occasionally. What about you? What level of fandom are you?
Yeah, I occasionally listen to him. That's probably the right descriptor. I was aware of him. I'd seen some clips of his on various topics. I'd listened to a handful of episodes. But one really interesting thing I learned just about his podcasting background is he sees himself as coming out of a movement of like health science popularizers that was started by Rhonda Patrick, who runs the podcast Found My Fitness. And I am a huge and have been for years Rhonda Patrick fan. I mean, she's changed my life in multiple ways.
I've
Now,
never heard of her.
I've listened to her
Found My
podcast going
Fitness.
back to like 2015. Now, disclaimer about Rhonda Patrick for the audience. Her podcast is a podcast for nerds. I think that's why Andrew Huberman has like eclipsed her. Her podcasts are basically like review articles of recently published papers in health sciences, and then she'll talk about how you can apply them to your own life. And it's but even I sometimes I'll be like, what are the words you just said? I don't understand a single thing in that sentence. So she's kind of like the books of kings of health sciences. There's
Oh,
a
okay.
natural limit on the audience size.
That is
But I'm a
really, I'll have to
longtime fan
look
of
her up.
hers, and so Huberman sees himself as a continuation of her kind of podcast.
Same with Huberman. Like, I really enjoy listening to him. And you probably heard the joke of like Huberman husbands, which is like men who watch Huberman Lab and like do all the things that he says. Jeff's a Huberman husband. He like does the cold plunging. Our parts during Huberman's thing when he's like talking about the really intricate part of the brain or whatever. I'm like, we'll just fast forward, tell me what I need to do to hack my life. But one thing that is funny too, though, I saw a comment once because Andrew Huberman talks about all kinds of things, but one of his big topics is like optimization, how to optimize productivity and health and this and that. And he's always got he's always basically testing various hypotheses, like, right, if you do this, will this help you work faster? And determining if there's legitimacy to those claims. And somebody in the comments wrote one time, like, all these hacks are really great, but like at some point we just probably need to like do the work, right? Because there's like so many. Huberman has covered like so many different ways to optimize your life. So I really like that kind of stuff, and I enjoy listening to him. I've never heard him talk about religion.
I had
So
no
that's why
idea,
this, yeah,
no idea until you told me about this clip.
yeah. So Jeff was listening to Huberman a couple days ago, and I walked by and I heard somebody say very like confidently, like, "Oh yeah, I feel comfortable saying I believe in God." And I was like, "That voice sounds kind of familiar. Who is that?" And Jeff's like, "That's Andrew Huberman." And I was like, "Oh!" And so that made me pay closer attention. And Huberman goes on to describe a little bit more about his faith. So I texted Ian, and so we're gonna listen today and just kind of talk about this cool development on the interweb where Andrew Huberman is not a Christian, but a theist, and definitely has some interesting thoughts.
Just go on record. I'm very comfortable saying it. I believe in God. I do.
Mm-hmm.
I think there are many things that science can explain.
Mm-hmm.
There are certain things science can't explain. But I'll even go a step further, which is that all the elements of science are entirely compatible with the idea of there being a God. And I'm not the first scientist to say this. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
Einstein believed in God. Carl Jung, one of the greatest psychologists ever, clearly believed in God. There are many atheist scientists. There are agnostic scientists who are just kind of like unsure, right?
Mm-hmm.
And, for me, I'm in absolute awe of biology.
Mm-hmm.
It's just incredible that we're sitting here having this conversation. It's with language, that there are little sound waves that you're perceiving and understanding. I mean, it's just, and I think the brain represents the apex of incredible in terms of biology. Like the heart is interesting, the immune system is interesting, the liver is interesting, but the brain is unbelievable.
Yeah.
I mean, think about the number of different ways you can move your body compared to another species.
Mm-hmm.
Think about what you did today. Think about what I was attempting to do today, right?
Yeah.
Spectacular. Think about technology, these lights, the, Tesla cars, spaceships. I mean,
Yeah.
The internet, I mean, unbelievable. And yet, oh, so real.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we could talk a bit about how well, I'll just say this. Secretly, I've always prayed. I grew up in a split religion home. My family's like the UN. We've got people from Guatemala, Denmark, Argentina, New York, like all the different political battles are in my family. Super left, super right, libertarians, lefties to the, it's crazy. Thanksgivings can be difficult.
Yeah.
But I'll say this, I absolutely pray. I absolutely love that the idea, but also what for me is really a deep belief, which is that we can't control everything. We're not in as much control as we think we are. And that the magnificence of biology and the magnificence of nature is, it's impossible for me to conceive how that could come about any other way. It just is. Now, yeah, I mean, I think that, full stop.
Who do you pray to?
That's an interesting one because I think God. Yeah. So I absolutely do. I've actually started reading the Bible recently, start to finish. I feel like it's my duty to learn and in some sense compare Old and New Testament. I'm really interested in the stories, but I'm fascinated by the story of us, right? And the story of everything. And so, but yeah, I pray out loud in the morning, sometimes again in the middle of the night if I wake up. And it's only recently that I've been doing this more often.
It's giving you peace? Or?
Oh, my goodness. It's given me so much. It's given me peace. And, it's going to sound weird and probably people are going to be like, what are you talking about? If this, it works. It works. There's a way in which certain things I was grappling with, I just couldn't resolve. I couldn't do it. And it was all internal and I just couldn't do it.
What?
That's Andrew Huberman. And that, if you want to tune in and listen to the whole conversation, which I definitely think you should, that's on the Cameron Haynes show, which I never heard of. But I like him. The little moment that I saw of him, he seemed like a very nice host and asking some good questions.
Watch it on YouTube. Don't listen to it in audio form. The audio podcast, which is what I listen to, Cameron Haynes interrupts, I think, every 5 minutes consistently with an ad.
No.
And it's like an ad out of nowhere. Like there'll be a pause in a sentence and then he comes in with an ad. And I felt like in the Pink Panther, Inspector Clouseau, how he hires his friend to attack him at random intervals throughout the day. The entire time I was listening to the podcast, I felt like I was going to be attacked by an ad at any moment because
an ad?
It was extremely unpleasant. It was not a good listening experience other than everything Andrew Huberman said, which was fascinating.
Good to know. Good to know. Yeah, that's like the Eric Metaxas show. I love Eric Metaxas, but oh my gosh, if I have to listen to another ad for My Pillow, I am going to smash something. There's gotta be a rule. There's too many.
Ads at the beginning or the end. I know some advertisers want something in the middle, maybe a dedicated segment in the middle where you say, now a word from our sponsors. Don't sneak up on me and slap me in the face with an ad. It's just so unpleasant. It ruins the entire experience. Anyways, Huberman, Carmen, the first thing I want to say about this is he really inspired me when he said, I pray out loud. That was kind of convicting to me because I used to almost exclusively pray out loud. And I haven't been praying out loud as much recently. And, just listening to him talk made me think, yeah, prayer is more directed and interpersonal and authentic and genuine and also efficacious when you pray out loud. And yeah, why haven't I been praying out loud as much? So
I completely agree. Yeah. It is amazing the difference too. I don't know about you, but when I read the Bible out loud too, I have the same experience. If I read the Bible out loud to myself or I pray out loud, it is just it's probably because it is more directed. You're actually thinking harder about it and it's going deeper into your consciousness. And honestly, the whole way that he talked about it was super encouraging to me, but also convicting. There was just a real settled confidence in his voice about it. When he said, I'm very comfortable saying I believe in God, I was just like, how many Christians sound like that when they talk about God? Like there's even like
Yeah.
myself, I think back to my different versions of myself, and I was such a just afraid, like I knew that other people didn't believe in God and I didn't want to sound weird. And so just finding any goofy way to get around saying that. And he just said it. So like even like he was talking about it and he was tempted to kind of do some qualifiers and then he said no, full stop. And I was like, dang, good for
Right.
you,
No,
Andrew
I
Huberman.
sensed that too. But I attributed it to, I think he's new at talking about these topics, and I think that's why we hadn't
Hmm.
heard about it before. I mean, he
Yeah.
to go back to our earlier point about Rhonda Patrick, he mentions he really only got into the podcasting scene in like 2019. So he is a relatively new kind of figure on the scene, and I think he was focused narrowly on his lane, and maybe now that he's more established as a public intellectual, he's weighing into some other topics. But you could tell, although he was commendably confident, for sure he wasn't sure exactly how to approach this. And yeah, I sensed that moment
Right.
as well, where
Right.
he almost layered on some qualifiers and then said, "No, God, I pray to God." You know, I
Stop,
winced
baby.
at the reading the Bible cover to cover, which this is a hobby horse soapbox of mine. I think that the Bible is not meant to be read cover to cover, and I will not go on a rant on this, but I will just bookmark this and note by way of a qualification that I think this idea of reading the Bible cover to cover basically comes from the subconscious influence of Islam and the proximity of Islam, and the way that Muslims think of the Quran as a single unit that kind of descended to Muhammad and this sort of organized whole, and it existed from eternity past. I think we've incorrectly imported that perception of Scripture into Christianity and use that lens to look at the Bible, even though in fact the Bible is a collection of books, and there's been all sorts of debate throughout church history and also Jewish history as to how the book should even be divided and what order they should even be in. Um, and if you're into church tradition or church councils, even, there's never been a church council that's codified a particular order for any particular reason. So there really isn't a hard and fast reason for the books to be in this order. And they're certainly not in chronological order. It's reading the Bible cover to cover is like if you were going to watch Star Wars and you watched like episode 1, 4, 3, 5, like hopping all over the place. And I just don't think that's the way the Bible's meant to be read, and it derails people. What happens is people get stuck in the Levitical law codes or the genealogies somewhere in the Pentateuch, and they just give up, and they don't realize that if they read, say, the books of Kings, there's an engrossing story, just like there was at the beginning of Genesis. But they have this idea that the Bible is sort of single, indivisible, cohesive whole in the way that the Quran is, that they should just be able to read cover to cover like any other book. And the reality is it's a collection of books. So if I could talk to Andrew Huberman, I would say, stop. The way to get to know the Bible is not this way. You should find
Mm.
some resources that will help guide you through particular books that might, like in Andrew Huberman's case, I would say, based on what he said about his prayer life, he should read the Psalms and maybe read like
Right.
a commentary or a study guide on the Psalms.
Yeah, yeah, that is. As you were talking, I wrote down like Ian should write an article for Stasios about how one should read the Bible. That'd be pretty good. I bet people would be into it because, yeah, I think you're right. Like, it's very popular, especially January is coming up. People are going to be like setting their goal to read through the whole Bible, and the impulse is to just do that at the beginning to the end. But like you said, the Bible is this unique book, the most unique book, and so how one approaches it is not going to be that. Like, I mean, can you? Sure. But like you said, you're going to run into a lot of questions. And the Bible is also the most studied book of all time. So there's so much to like dive into that you're going to miss if you just take that approach. What I did really like is how he said when he was reading the Bible, he said, quote, I just really, or I'm probably going to mess it up, but he said something like, I think I need to read the story of us and the
Yes.
story of everything. Like, what a weirdly beautiful way to describe the Bible, like the story of us and the story of everything. The way he was talking about it, it's very obvious that it seems very obvious to me that he's having like a sincere spiritual experience. He's obviously not yet comfortable ascribing that to Jesus. I guess I would expect him to talk about it with a little more distance, like, oh, I feel like it's my duty. I need to check out the Bible and see what's in there, and I need to check out what's in other places, other holy books. But he sounds like he already kind of has developed like a sincere connection to the stories of the Bible, which I think if you go into the Bible with an open mind of just kind of like, what what is this God like? You know, obviously lots of people believe in this God, and I'm just curious, what is this God really like? If you go into it with just a little bit of openness, I think even if there's parts of Christianity that don't make sense to you or don't appeal to you, you still, like he was saying, you kind of are in awe nonetheless. Like, it is a book full of incredible stories when one stops and thinks about it.
Yeah, I mean, I empathize with what he said. I empathize with a lot of things he said about his biography as well, but I maybe I'm reading too far into it. But I think I can see, I mean, you can see pretty easily how someone could get from sort of a general natural theology. Like he posits a personal God who's involved in our lives and answers prayer as the best explanation for sort of the majesty and complexity and beauty of like the DNA replication process. I mean, something this beautiful is at least much more probable if God exists than if God does not. And Huberman goes further, and I think he says it's incomprehensible how this could be without the existence of God. And I think it's a short step from there to, at minimum, at the most conservative, say, okay, well, if there's a personal God who may be involved in our lives, I'm going to, C.S. Lewis has his famous metaphor of faith is the ocean and religion is the map. And the map is what other people who've gone before you have found out by sailing the real ocean. And yes, it's less real than the ocean, but you're going to be lost at sea if you don't look at the map. And so it's a small kind of conservative step to
Mm-hmm.
say, I'm going to read the Psalms because the Psalms are just one of the most historically renowned collections of people grappling with and crying out in yearning to this personal God that I see revealed in nature and my prayer life. So maybe God isn't even the God of Jacob, but I'm at least going to start with the Psalms. That's a good starting point. And and then from there, I think there are rational reasons, even if you don't get into the resurrection, let's say, to treat the God of Jacob as sort of your plan A if you're investigating theism, because here is this God who declared through his prophets millennia ago that he was going to be the God of all of the nations, that all of the nations were going to acknowledge the Jews in the midst of them as the people of God. And he declared this when no one on the planet except the Hebrews in the Levant, in this little corner of one continent, worshiped God. And sure enough, a majority of people in the world today profess to worship the God of Jacob in some form. So if there's a God, if you just grant, as Huberman does, there's a personal God involved in our lives. That by itself, I think, before you've even looked into the resurrection, before you've looked into what Jesus said, that should make the God of Jacob your plan A for the God that you look into as potentially the revealed God.
Other conversations we've had too, sort of this, we were talking about the Rasmussen book, and he is definitely a theist. And so it I don't know, maybe I'm just excited about Andrew Huberman's what he said, but it seems like to me, maybe we're at this point culturally where people are starting to really recognize the limits of materialism. Like, materialism does not explain so many things, and materialism doesn't explain the most important things, in my opinion, like the things that most people like care about and wrestle with, and like just the questions that human beings are most concerned about. Materialism does not have very satisfying answers to the average person. And so maybe culturally we're at a moment where more and more people, like, I'm hoping this means like materialism is not going to be the de facto automatic accepted norm, you know?
I think there's an unacknowledged theistic revival going on already. I think it not only is it coming, but it's already here. And he mentions Einstein's belief in God. Einstein, of course, said he believed in the God of Spinoza. I put out the first part of my Deus Ex Machina essay with Catholic World Report a couple days ago, and that I have a sentence in there that sort of summarizes the whole thing, where I say the philosophical heart of Western atheism is now dead. And I was able to, just a couple days before they ran it, I had to go in and make an edit to that part of the essay because I was listening to Elon Musk on the Lex Friedman podcast. And Elon Musk has long been this proponent of the simulation hypothesis, the idea that our universe exists within a computer substrate, that personal simulators created it and created us for some purpose. And this Lex Friedman interview was the first time I've heard Elon Musk say God to refer to the simulators. And specifically, Elon Musk said the God of Spinoza, which is the God that Einstein ostensibly believed in. And Huberman kind of makes a reference to Einstein's faith there. So I think, sadly, Christians are not remotely as engaged with this phenomenon as they should be. Part of that is just because this isn't a fully fledged Christian theism. And so Christians are writing it off. But a big part of it, I think, is just that the church today is so de-intellectualized. And so we're unequipped to deal with what's going on. And we're seeing these people like Huberman, in his own words, or like Elon Musk, arrive at forms of theism through a kind of natural theology. And as Christians, we have this millennia-old heritage of natural theology, but today we're not doing natural theology, and we don't teach natural theology in the churches. And so what's happening is secular people are doing their own natural theology without us and building their own natural theology. And I mean, yesterday was the time for Christians to get engaged in this conversation, but the second best time for Christians to get engaged is right now.
Thanks so much, Ian. As always, fun to chat. And definitely, like you said, go listen to the full Huberman conversation. It's a good one.